we secure your future.
Well, hello and welcome to your premier business show, KTN Business Weekly, on the 15th day of August 2012. This is indeed your independent and authoritative news channel, KTN. My name is Boni Tunya, and as alluded earlier, this is indeed a special edition of KTN Business Weekly, where we'll be having a live debate in studio, and we're talking about the emotive issue of the VAT Bill 2012. Now, in August of 2011, Treasury proposed amendments to the VAT bill. What the essence of that is that it will slap a 16% slapping of a 16% increment on your daily products, basically pushing the cost of living higher to the ordinary Kenyans. Just what does this mean? Now, last week we had a setting stage of this debate, and here's how it went.
In particular, it seems to me that all over the world, basic commodities that the common man would rely on, our common mwananchi rely on, unga, jogo, bread, milk, unprocessed food, agricultural process, those things, if you tax them at standard rate, is not going to be helpful in an economy where nearly 70% of the people are living what is pretty much at or below the poverty line.
Overall, the VAT bill is a good bill because it is meant to enhance tax revenues. And the more we enhance tax revenues, the easier it is to implement Vision 2030. Because on the other hand, we have many issues that we have to juggle many balls, because we have debt in this country, and many of these projects are going to either be PPP or debt. We would rather have higher tax revenues rather than have higher debt.
I think the aim of introducing this VAT bill was really twofold. In the context of the reform of tax policy and administration, the government wanted to have a look at the VAT bill in order to look at ways to improve the efficiency with which it's run, so basically enhance the administration of the VAT. And the second key objective really for the authorities with this new VAT bill is to mobilize additional domestic revenues, and these domestic revenues need to be mobilized in order to finance some key expenditures in the country, including for social protection objectives and development needs, while minimizing the impact in terms of the fiscal deficit.
Well, indeed, those are some of the views we had last week. And today, you can join the conversation via our Twitter handles at KTN Kenya or at KTN Business or SMS line 8040, and we'll sample your views in the course of this live telecast. Now, to take the conversation forward, I'm joined in studio right now by Nikhil Hira, who's the tax partner at Deloitte.
Hi, Bonnie.
Patrick Mtange, Chairman ISPAC.
Hello, everybody.
And Kwame Owino, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Now, gentlemen, to get this thing rolling, we've always had the VAT bill. Why are we having these changes now? Probably, Patrick, you want to take that?
Well, Bonnie, there is the 2010 Constitution.
Correct.
Requires that most of the legislations have to be reviewed to be aligned into the requirements as set in the Constitution 2010. There is also the East African Community, which requires that member states need to harmonize, among other things, the internal and external tariffs.
Correct.
And in the internal tariffs, VAT becomes one of those pieces of legislations that need to be harmonized. And then coming back home, the business community have quite a challenge on the burden of submitting a myriad of returns and also being subjected to a myriad of audits. And at the same time, the incidence of so many items under exempt, 394 items exempted under the current VAT Act, and 416 under the current VAT tax, just give you a brief of how complex it is to administer and how expensive it is.
Indeed, already Patrick speaking from a very technical point. Nikhil, why now?
I think basically we required a reform of our laws. The existing VAT Act came into force in 1990. As Patrick has said, huge number of items were exempt, huge number of items were zero rated. Administration was just not working. That's one of the reasons we've got such a big VAT refund problem. We're only collecting between 25 and 27% of our total revenue from VAT, and when you think it's a consumption tax, that really doesn't make logical sense.
Correct.
Other economies are collecting 35-40% in VAT, and the reason is exactly as Patrick said. Our law was too complex, it was too convoluted. Over the years it had been patched with people lobbying, more and more things came in. Even as a tax expert, it's difficult to understand what was in that act. So we needed to get rid of what we had and bring in the new, which I think is a very positive step.
I'll take a very pedestrian point of view and comment. Is the main reason for this bill just increasing revenue collection by the KRA?
No, I mean, the bill itself has purposes. The drafters, of course, mentioned the purposes for which it does, and one of them, of course, is to ease, to reduce the burden of compliance and all that. And I think about 3 or 4 of them. So really, and as has been argued, raising revenue, which is a fact, I think was considered a secondary question. The most important thing is to actually align it in such a way that it makes it easy for compliance. But as it stands now, it will effectively raise more revenue and at the same time raise the costs of certain products that are not subject to VAT today. And that should be admitted. That should be a fair point.
Now, gentlemen, the bill elicits equal emotion, negative and positive, from the people for it and against it. Let's just start with the positive side, okay? Patrick, what are the positive attributes? What are the pros of VAT Bill 2012?
Well, the VAT Bill 2012, in seeking to ease the compliance by both on the enforcement side by KRA and on the compliance side by those who are collecting VAT, it makes it a very easy bill to, at least for the business community, but secondly, it's easy to administer in that sense, and therefore it brings efficiency and a bit of modernity because of the IT-related solutions to filing returns that will follow.
If we're talking about efficiency, let's talk about its role, say, in total revenue collection. How are we doing? What is the total contribution of, say, collection from VAT to the basket? As we speak now, before we reform it and make it better.
Okay, now it is at about 24% as a percentage of
the ratio to probably GDP.
Yes. With regard to GDP. And it is the second biggest contributor to the total revenue after direct or income tax, in short. So in that sense, it is a significant component to the revenue collection to the national kitty. Yes.
Although, sorry to, although it's not big enough. This is a consumption tax. Who bears this tax? You and me and the 3 of us here, when we go into a shop, pay VAT.
Right.
Therefore, if our economy, when it was on the upturn, and no doubt will be in the future as well, if there's more spending in the economy, then VAT should take a much, much bigger proportion of the total revenue we earn. But it's not, and it's not moving. It's not moving from that 25, 26, 27% of total revenue. Because our law is too complex, administration has been slightly weak and not strong enough to deal with it. And that is why we're also in this mess of huge VAT refunds that business is really suffering with today. So from that point of view, the new law, or the proposed new law, is going to make it, as Patrick said, much simpler for the administration to deal with and for the taxpayer to deal with. The question of whether we've moved from an extreme of too many things being in zero rating and exempt to virtually nothing is the one that is an issue. And I'm sure that there's some middle ground there which we've not necessarily explored at this stage.
Before we get to the elephant in the room, that is what should be zero rated and what should not, Nikhil painted a very clear picture. Yes, it's contributing about 20-25% to what it should be more because it's a consumption tax. But then we've pointed out probably lack of compliance or of poor governance and whatnot. But then what are the areas that the VAT Bill 2012 is proposing to check that?
Okay, I think the first thing to look at is that for the first time we're actually talking about 21st century business. Our whole world is surrounded around downloading things from the iTunes store, from Amazon, from you name it, everywhere. But our legislation, both income tax and VAT, never actually dealt with the concept of electronic services. This VAT bill has got a section in it dealing with it. It's not entirely clear yet how we're going to enforce it, but we're on the right track. If you look at our income tax law, it was for the first time in 2009 that we mentioned software. And you can imagine how much computer technology has moved forward since then. So that's a positive step. The second really positive step, I think, in this bill is that it now gives the commissioner or the taxpayer the opportunity to apply to the commissioner for an advance ruling. So you get an advance ruling on a transaction, on the tax treatment of that transaction, before you enter into the transaction. Helps you because you now know what the tax treatment actually is going to be. One of the cardinal principles of a fair tax system is you must have certainty. And it helps the revenue because it stops unnecessary disputes between us. So I think that's another very, very positive step in the bill. I think they've also made other areas such as importing of services and accounting for tax on that. They've made it much simpler. They've expanded definitions so that we're covering as much as we can, and in the net result should be less disputes and less time spent fighting with the revenue. Unfortunately, I might find myself out of a job, but nonetheless, there it is.
Exactly. Now, there was also the point of a reduction, and I need you gentlemen to clarify this for me. The bill also seeks to probably reduce the period of lodging refunds. That does seem to be a very, coming from a very unusual point. That is a carrier that is proposed in this bill. Is that true, and how do we go about that?
Well, let's understand why we've got the refund problem. We've got it partly because we have too many items. I think, I don't know how many there are. I think you said 416.
There is 416 zero
416.
rated.
I've never counted that.
And
So
394 exempt.
right. Now, those 416 zero rated items are all resulting in the suppliers of those goods being in a VAT refund position, because they charge 0% tax, but they're allowed to claim all the input tax that they suffer. Now, that element of refund has just sort of ballooned and expanded over the years, and the administration has not been able to keep up with actually auditing it and keeping it going. Indeed, in 1998, I remember sitting with the revenue and coming up with the scheme where currently members of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants are allowed to audit refunds. That eased the problem a little bit. We then had the issue of withholding VAT, which was introduced 4 or 5 years ago. To me, that was completely nonsensical. It gave lovely short-term gain to the Kenya Revenue Authority and the Treasury, but no one thought that we've got to refund all this right now. And when you look at the amount that is currently got to be refunded, a big chunk of it is because of the withholding VAT scheme. And what has happened is we're not bringing in the tax, and yet we're having to refund it. So reducing the number of zero-rated items makes a lot of sense, and it's the correct way to go. It's just a question of whether we've reduced it too much.
Kwame, 16% on some commodities that we thought shouldn't be VATable. How does that lie with you?
Well, I think tax reforms in general are welcome, and every country grapples with the tax reform every so often. to make it modern, and for the same reasons that we've said. As the economy also changes, you need a new tax structure in order to accommodate those changes. But if you look at the character of households in this country, we have 9 million households. We are largely a rural country, and yes, we have a huge retail element. But if you raise 16% on common household items, that would be milk, bread, and everything else. For bread, that will be an extra 7 shillings at the least per loaf.
It's already too expensive now.
Well, yes, but the thing, the most important point is that will be the effect that happens immediately this bill comes into effect, as it is today. So there'll definitely be a rise in prices. For some people, that's okay. For other people, there'll be difficulty. I think for milk as well.
These other people, because we've always talked about as the other people.
Yes.
Still on that question, there's the issue that the proponents of the bill are saying, hey, we are only saying a 16% increment on processed goods. So the people in the rural area can still access, exempt 16%. But then these other people, where are they, apart from the people in the rural area?
Well, there's a huge number of urban poor in Kenya as well. As you know, you don't have to mention it, Mathare residential area, Kibera, and many other places that we see whenever there are accidents or something that's a bit worrying happens. So these are people who work on very low incomes, and an additional 7 shillings a day on one item is significant for them, because some of them take home just as much as maybe 50 or 100 shillings per day, and they have to live in a household in which those are that's the money that they use to cover they cover their expenses. So obviously it'll cause some difficulty. And it's significant in my view that they're talking to members of parliament who represent them, who feel, hey, this will have adverse effects on the people we represent. And that is a legitimate point to debate. We can't say that the nation's interest, or rather the government's interest in raising more revenue, should supersede that of a person who feels that you may actually reduce my ability to survive in a city. Correct. So that's a legitimate
case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Gentlemen, I'll get back to you. I want to hear Patrick's rejoinder on that issue. But if you're joining us now, there's a special edition of KTN Business Weekly where we are debating VAT Bill 2012. What are its pros and cons, and which outweighs the other? Stay tuned with KTN.
Management Tips in association with the Management University of Africa School of Management and Leadership. Management University of Africa, enabling futures, impacting progress.
It's going to be a goal for Kenya and a goal for David Rudisha. David Rudisha is the world 800 meters champion.
Becoming a champion on the track for me started with being a champion on the playground. Play is important for children's healthy development, but while they play, they get exposed to harmful germs. When I heard from the Safeguard team that good hand washing could reduce illnesses in children, I decided to accept the invitation from Safeguard to join the work they are doing with our Kenyan playground champions. It takes a lot of effort to become a champion. Winning a race starts with taking the right step, like hand washing with Safeguard.
Safeguard, unbeatable protection for unbeatable champions.
Cities were growing by the day, but as the new buildings grew taller, the roads surrounding them just couldn't keep up. Then along came the Michelin Man, reminding us that the right tire changes everything. Stronger, more durable, the Michelin Energy XM2 tire is more resistant to pothole damage. Michelin, a better way forward.
For more information on pothole guarantee, call Kingsway Tire Expert Centers countrywide. From the city to the highway, from the off-road to the open road. The Nissan Hardbody Double Cab, also known as a Toti, is a one-ton pickup that has stood tall amongst its peers for sheer strength and outright durability. Their Toti can run for thousands of kilometers even on the toughest terrain with affordable maintenance bills. With its 2.5-litre common rail turbo engine, their Toti is African-built and tough vehicle.
Nani kama Nissan? Martha gets up early for another working day. Na kama Tony, she has to make her way. Huko Kisumu, the nets are almost ready. Kazi kwenye lines is going real steady. Na huko Pwani, there's business to be done, both for Mama Amina and for John. Ingawaji wakati mwingine, things don't always work out the way we want them to. Tunajua just how hard it is to work in the dark of night. But the future's looking brighter, of that you can be sure. Popote ulipo nchini Kenya na chochote ufanyacho, you can be sure Kenya Power is there. Working hard, just like you. Kenyans supply the energy. We supply the power.
Is he still crying? We're up all night with him. It could be from a wet cloth nappy, but I wake him at night to change his nappy. In my job, I found that babies are not used to temperature changes, and when you have to change his wet nappy at night, wetness can spread to his chest, causing him discomfort, unlike with a disposable diaper. And that's why a quality diaper is so important, because it keeps your baby dry at night. Your baby's health is more important than anything. Endorsed by the Kenya Pediatric Association.
KTN, your authoritative channel.
Good evening, it's Wednesday, the 15th day of August 2012. We're glad you're watching KTN and we're coming to you live from our control center. Let's now have a look at some of the stories you should expect at the top of the hour. Minister allows remedial classes but bans tuition lessons. Death toll in Ugandan military helicopter crash hits 3. Outrage of a cabinet move to amend integrity bill. And still on KTN, no more deadline extension. Minister wants cancel rate defaulters. We'll have these stories and of course so much more at the top of the hour. Join Eric Latif and myself. See you then.
NSSF has intensified its campaign not only in ensuring transparency and accountability, but also in service delivery to its members. We visited Hill Branch here in Nairobi.
Hill Branch is the premier branch in NSSF. We are the branch who undertakes the basic NSF activities, such that headquarters just do administration, but all NSF functions are done from the branch. We have had a number of changes, positive changes for service delivery. One, payment of contributions. I've introduced, I've expanded the area for collection of paying contributions and introduced counters whereby if you are paying voluntary, you don't need to queue. If you are paying over 50,000 and above, you don't need to queue. And or if you have sent us your return on email, you don't also need to queue. We have also made sure that the time taken for payment is reduced to at least 5 minutes only. I have expanded the registration area And now we have a very spacious area where customers come, and as they wait to be served, they sit. But the place where we have had tremendous changes is on the payment of benefits. As you are aware, initially benefits used to take over 30 days for a customer to come from other places to be paid in Nairobi. We have reduced benefit payment period to 6 days. We have also brought what is called as electronic fund transfer. If you have an account with any bank, we are able to process your money and transfer your money to your account directly.
We spoke to happy beneficiaries of this new direction by NSSF, and this is what they had to say.
Mwaka wa 2006 December 25 nikapata ajali ya hii mkono, ukafunjika na pia mbavu mbili. Nikawa sasa nimeacha kazi. Hii mwaka huu 2012 ikawa tena huu mkono, ile plate iliwekwa imeteguka, imekatika, na sasa mkono umerudi tu kama ule umefunjika yani. Sasa ndio sasa nikaenda hospitali, nikawekwa sasa plate. Baada ya hiyo ndio sasa nikakumbuka kwa NSSF kuna kitu nilikuwa nakatwa. Ndio nimekuja leo nikakuta wafanyikazi wazuri, wana umungu mwingi, sababu wana upendo. Waliniamkia vizuri, nikamwambia hata karamu sina, hata kusaidia nisaidieni kuandika. Wameniandikia kila kitu, mimi ni kidore tu nimeweka.
I retired last year on May, and the money which was deducted for the NSF, it was a little, but very, very, very benefit, because you cannot demand it until you come to this age.
Meniambia kuanzia saa hii ni hesabu siku 12 tapata check yangu.
And at this time the service I am getting here is very perfect, very perfect. Wherever you go, in every counter they give you a very first class service. And even they called me yesterday, come, your check is ready, not like before.
We want now to try and request all our members, while they're still working, to make sure that their accounts are in order through Sawadisha. This is why there is a process Sawadisha. Because your account is in order, the number of days you take to get paid is lessened.
And welcome back. This is your special edition KTN Business Weekly, where we're debating VAT Bill 2012. And the gentleman in studio is Nikhil Hira from Deloitte, Patrick Mtange from ISPAC, and Kwame Owino from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Just before we get back to the debate, I'd like to sample your views via our Twitter handle at KTN Kenya. And what Wastano says, Kere Bos Njerina yesterday said government usually opts for spending on development rather than tax refunds. That is leading to delays. There is one from Genghis Capital and says positivity in the part of interest charges on refunds to enhance efficiency. There is a hilarious one here saying now peeling back the mask on VAT 2012. And indeed, you're free to send in your views via our Twitter handles, and we'll be more than glad to sample as we move on. Now, Patrick.
Yes.
We've said, yes, we need to change the VAT law, okay? And we've made proposals. But in the process, we seem to be killing the country's poor. We're talking about putting the 16% increase on goods that were, exempt earlier. What effect would this have on the country's poor first?
Okay, definitely there will be an increased cost on the basic food commodities once you impose a 16% VAT. But remember, it has also been said that we have unprocessed goods which do not attract any VAT at all. For example, if I got my maize grain to the miller and went home and prepared my ugali,
yes,
I'm not in the tax net. But if I move to Nakumatt and the Chumi and the kiosk in town, I will have, and that's why.
But then, Patrick, how many of us can walk to the miller and do that?
Exactly, that's where the challenge is, and therefore we are proposing that we have a restricted list of goods which have the highest impact on that vulnerable group to be zero rated, so that it can be able. We still implement the VAT Act, but without the impact on the vulnerable members of our society.
Now, Nikhil, I'm not going to ask you what should be exempt and what not, but then we seem to have a lot of goods that were either zero rated or they are in the wrong bracket for some reason or the other. How did you get here?
I think principally because there was a lot of lobbying being done, and over the years, more and more different industries lobbied, got their way, but it was done, gradually over time. It wasn't a concerted effort that everyone tried to do it together. And as a result, from a reasonable list when the Act came out in 1989, we got to the 419 items we've got today. On this question of the basic food, I was looking today at what the UK do. They zero rate items which are classified as food which is for human consumption.
Yes.
So the key point there is human consumption. Now, it's not quite as simple as that because they have some exceptions and exclusions and what have you. But when you go to the next step, then one would say, okay, well, what about restaurants? Why should that be zero rated? Well, it isn't, because the UK actually says if you're buying hot food sitting in a restaurant, then you will pay the VAT on it. But if you're going into a supermarket and buying your eggs and your bread, that's food for human consumption, therefore it'll be zero rated. So we could put something into our law on that sort of line, which will achieve that middle ground between the extreme we're in today and the extreme we're going to be in tomorrow if the bill goes through.
I just want to rope in a comment on this. We're talking about a 16% increase on contraceptives, on medicine, on basic foods. Is this the cost we have to pay if to bring in what, 50 billion?
Yes, I think fundamentally it's clear that we went back too far in trying to rationalize the list of zero-rated goods, and actually to make sure that, to the extent that is possible, you treat all industries and all goods fairly. But I'm not too sure that when we had the census, and that's not too sure, and the Ministry of Planning is very concerned about the rate of our growth and what effects that has on households, then you go to the other side and begin to tax some of these health products and contraceptive products. It's just bad policy, in addition to the fact that it shows disharmony and lack of coherence in policy from one side or the other. So it is still a show of the fact, what this illustrates, for all it's good, what this illustrates is the fact that we actually went back too far. And again, what it means is, the problem with going back too far is, unless we establish it right now, we'll have people lobbying, and every now and again they'll be able to put it. And so our list of whatever the number is, in another 10 years, 20 years perhaps, we'll get back to the 400. Because there'll always be justification for one or the other thing to be left.
I'd like to steer this conversation a bit differently now. And Patrick, let's now talk about the other stories, the untold stories about the VAT Bill 2012. We're talking about remissions. We're talking about impacts to investors and in the business world at large. Yes, we're saying, hey, the common man may not have been treated too well, but then what are these other untold stories in regards to VAT Bill 2012?
Yes, one of them is the issue of remissions, and the other one is the VAT on investment capital.
Yes.
Where if I'm coming to invest, and God forbid we are going into public-private partnerships, if I'm coming to invest my capital here, in the course of constructing the premises where I need to do production, or in the course of extracting the mines or drilling boreholes, I'm expected to pay VAT before I even begin to recoup my profit. That also is a challenge to investors and public-private partnerships. And if we are looking at the Vision 2030 with regard to Concert City and say the tourist cities of Isiolo, where foreign investors have to come that will be another area that we might need to align so that we can attract investors.
Nikhil, your take on that?
Again, we've done exactly the same thing on remissions as we did on the list of zero-rated and exempt items. We went from too many to none. And there is a middle ground, but we don't seem to want to find it. To me, we need remissions, but we don't need as many as we've been giving. We need to have focus and targeted remissions. Patrick's mentioned Konza City, oil and gas, mining. These are natural resources where the government is going to go into private-public partnership. The international players who come and invest will extract these natural resources, and they will pay a royalty to the government based on gross revenues. So it's not as though the government's going to lose. And we're almost in a position with some of these where if they don't come here, they'll go to Uganda, or they'll go to Tanzania, or they'll go to Russia, or wherever it is. So we do need to have some form of remissions. My worry is that we've moved from a few, maybe too many, to nothing. So why aren't we talking about what happens in the middle there? And I think that's where the focus of the debate needs to be, on remissions.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Well, I think a few good things about the bill as well is the fact that in some respects it's reduced discretion for the officers of the Revenue Authority regarding decisions.
Yes.
It also requires that whenever decisions or rulings are made, this be published. And the good thing about that is then it becomes a precedent in the sense that it binds the commissioner and his officers until they issue a new one. The good thing about that is then it provides for a business person or whichever citizen predictability. You know beforehand how a certain situation will be interpreted. And that's a good thing. And you have a record which shows that if you interpret it in that way, then the other person cannot then penalize you for that. There are also rulings, there's also time limits during which if you make a petition for one reason or another and there's no response within 6 months, I think, 6 months, then it is taken. But the final decision remains as it was at that time. So you cannot have a revision to your disadvantage after that. So there are quite a number of good things. I think one thing that I'd like to put in just before we end is the fact that there's the assumption, and I keep asking myself about the VAT bill, there's also the discretion for the cabinet secretary, not the commissioner, with a 25%, which means that our VAT rates could move from 16 to 20 or 12. So 16 is the medium because it can move by 25% either side, which means that it could be lower. And my view is if you're going to expand the net of things under which it applies, there's no, understand the complication within the ESC, but there's no written law supplied from heaven which says that it must remain at 16. So these are some of the things that could be debated reasonably and reach us to a bill that many more people will be more comfortable with.
And of course, we can't end this show without looking at this issue. For all the policy makers watching this and the general Kenyan, it is clear from this discussion that probably something didn't go right in regards to VAT Bill 2012. How do we undo that?
We need a debate about it. In 2011, when it was issued, a lot of us, including the Institute, my firm did it, and I'm sure the IEA did it as well. We submitted submissions to the Treasury of where we thought the shortcomings were and where we thought the positive aspects of it were. I'm not sure that those were necessarily addressed or even read. We then had a public meeting in January 2012, which to me was almost a tick-the-box exercise. The Constitution says that the public must be involved, so we'll have a meeting. Now we had a meeting, we all voiced all these things, positive and negative, and when the bill finally came out on budget day, it still hadn't changed. So I think we do need to get involved in the debate around it, and we can't just leave it to our MPs to do it. They also need to understand the implications, other than, yes, it's going to cost them wananchi more, because there are other far-reaching implications as well, both positive and negative, that need to be brought out.
So it was the medicine was needed, it's how it was administered. But you've been looking at me like you have something to say regarding that.
Yes, I say this, that it's a good document. There are areas that we can be able to engage and be able to create a middle ground, as we have already suggested, that with regard to those very sensitive commodities, they need to be specified and restricted. And then in the area, other areas that are affecting investments, it also needs to be looked at. And there are areas, as my friend has said, that are inconsistent with policy itself. For example, enhancing food security, you don't do that by increasing VAT on fertilizer, on pesticides, and any agricultural inputs if you want to make the country food secure. But those are areas that can be discussed, ground found, and then we pass the bill.
Probably, gentlemen, I'd like you to tie this into your closing remarks. We'll start from Kwame coming this side. Granted that, yes, the bill is passed, okay? Are you confident in the mechanisms that carriers employ to ensure that we'll be able to net the 50 billion we're talking about, Kwame?
Okay, I think my assessment is, given the public claim, rather public clamor right now, and some of the responses we've seen from members of parliament, it would probably require a very big resolution of factors for this bill to pass. But nevertheless, if it did, and it came into effect immediately, I think there'd be a jump in revenue, though there'd be a significant shock as well, which may not have good political consequences. But I think to resolve the fact that, and let me say this, I think the objects for the reason, for setting up the bill and the task force actually, which developed, which culminated in the drafting of the bill, were completely valid. For that reason, one of the ways to actually resolve this is because there's been a transition period which has been allowed before some of the goods and services that are, some of the goods especially, that are exempt, fuel oil and some food items, would come in at 3 years. Perhaps that period could be extended as a way of reaching the middle ground, because if you extend it, then you give people an opportunity to actually recover over time and to see how this works so that it does. 3 years is, in my view, a bit too short, and coming in an elections year, it's something that many politicians are not...
Sends all the wrong messages.
Yes.
Very quickly, closing comments, Patrick.
Yeah, closing comments is that, yes, in agreement totally with my colleague that we need to pass the bill, but with adjustments that make it a palatable instrument that then gradually begins to bring in revenue. Because we expect the government to provide services, we need to be able to help it resolve those issues so that we move forward. In its current state, it will be difficult for it to move forward.
Take us home, Nikhil.
No doubt, we've got to pass this bill. We've got to pass it, though, with a little bit of common sense. Right now, I think we're looking at it from the point of view, this is the revenue it's going to generate from us. But I don't necessarily think, as it currently is, it's for the entire benefit of the public and the country as a whole. But a lot of it is very positive, very useful, and must go through. Because it is, if you look where we're ranked on the world rankings of ease of paying tax and ease of doing business, we're in the bottom 25% quartile. A bill like this is designed to push us up a little bit. And that's what we need if we're going to encourage people to come and invest in our country.
Indeed. I dare not add anything. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming through. Well, indeed, if you've been watching, this is the special edition of KTN Business Weekly. We've been debating VAT Bill 2012. And while the show may end, the conversation continues online via our Twitter handles at KTN Kenya or at KTN Business, or also our SMS line 8040. My name is Boni Tunya. From me, it is good night.
Business Weekly, brought to you by National Social Security Fund. NSSF, we secure your future.